There goes the fence. Holy cow. Oh!
Are you good back there?
Yeah, we're good.
Those are scenes today flying into the eye of Hurricane Ian by Nick Underwood, a crew member on the NOAA 42 research aircraft. That's around daybreak today, around 10 to 12 Z on a P-3 Orion at 8,000 feet. He described it as the roughest flight of his career. NOAA does some amazing work, and I thought those were some scenes worth looking at. Let's take a look at the radar. We've got Hurricane Ian moving inland, located right about there. That's going to be the eye. That's going to be north of Fort Myers. Let's see, maybe about 10 miles inland. And the eye wall, pretty well defined right there. We'll take another look at that close to the end of this weathercast because it does take a while to get through it, and the storm will have changed since then. The surface map, let's check that out. The surface chart is always an important place to start out with, and what we see here is high pressure in the Great Lakes area, a series of fronts through the southeastern U.S. and the high plains, and of course Hurricane Ian down towards the bottom of the chart. And there it is, 155 miles an hour on that. That places it as a high-end Category 4 storm. However, the latest NHC update at 5 p.m. Eastern Time does have it diminishing to 120 knots, which is a low-end Category 4 storm. Hurricane Ian is defined by a very broad zone of strong winds. I noticed early on this morning I wasn't seeing a whole lot of strong winds close to the circulation, but they were really fanned out across a wide area. And you can see even right now 30 knots in the central Gulf of Mexico. And with Ian, there's also a significant storm surge. You've probably seen the video out around Fort Myers and the barrier islands of coastal inundation. There's a clip right there on Twitter showing some of that. That's on the barrier island outside of Fort Myers. And the other story, of course, with the storm will be the significant rains. Compared to what we were showing back on Monday, where the model solutions and the NHC forecast was a little bit different, we're looking at a slower path across Florida, and that's going to significantly increase the rainfall. We're looking at maybe 15 to 18 inches across this area, and some isolated totals up to 25 to 30 inches. And that means significant inundation of houses in low-lying areas in central Florida, and there could be neighborhoods underwater, rescues on boats, and that kind of thing. We're not going to really get into that since this is a meteorological program. However, we are showing you the possibility that will be happening later tonight. Also, with the highly shared environment across Florida, tornadic storms. Not a whole lot of them, but they are out there, and we have tornado watches and a few warnings in effect right now. There's the main tornado watch we have this afternoon, and that's in a classic area ahead and to the right of the storm track, and that's where the 0 through 1 kilometer SRH tends to be the highest. Looking at things right this minute, the area is getting dry slotted, some of the wraparound working its way through South Florida, and that's cutting down on the number of cells, but still there is the potential through the remainder of the afternoon for a few rotating supercells. And a quick look at the hydrometeorology. There it is, the extreme precip near and just north and northeast of Orlando. And those yellows, those mustard colors, are above 10 inches. Fortunately, I don't see any 20s on there, but there could be some isolated 20-inch amounts here and there through that area. And then moving into the extended, this is how the forecast fans out. These areas right here, the red colors, those are going to be about 3 to 4 inches. The dry air advection coming into the storm itself, that's going to help prevent some of the heavier precipitation from stacking up. But due to the high precipitable water, the efficient convective processes, there will be some locally heavy rain through the Carolinas all the way up into Virginia and parts of the Northeast. Here are the tracks we were looking at on the GFS early on Monday. This is kind of interesting because you can see that the ensemble members were bringing the storm into the western part of the state and way up on the west coast. And the official NHC track took the eastern part of that, and the deterministic GFS, the white line right there, that's the official GFS output, also went kind of close to the center, kind of a median path. And the actual path, of course, went like that. If we go back to the 0Z ECMWF, it was already bringing that storm a little bit far to the east. And by Monday night, it moved a little bit further to the east, a little bit at a time, and the GFS followed suit. So I think the ECMWF is something we need to look at during tropical cyclone season. I didn't pay too much attention to it last year because we were seeing a lot of disagreement between the GFS, but I think with this particular storm, it did do quite a bit better. Elsewhere around the country, yeah, there are other areas we need to look at also. Let's check that out. Covering everything, doing a comprehensive analysis, that's part of doing a proper weather analysis, and that's what we focus on for this program. What we see here is cold air, and that's sinking southeast as it usually does. And with that, low temperatures and low dew points. Look, those dew points down in the 30s around Wisconsin, 40s in Chicago, and 50s and 60s temperatures through the Great Lakes area. And of course, that's going to feed into Ian. It's getting close. You can see up there in Georgia, dew points are in the 30s. And even right down here around Albany, 37, that's some very dry air. That's all going to be entrained in the storm pretty quickly. Maybe not in the next 6 hours, but definitely by tomorrow. So by tomorrow morning, we're going to be looking at significant deterioration of the storm, and the frictional effects will have a huge impact as well. And just to give you an example, here's Hurricane Ian crossing Cuba yesterday. Look at that black enhancement around the eye. You can see it kind of go away as it passes over the island and reestablish itself as it gets back out over the warmer waters. It's the availability of latent heat, the reduction of friction, all of that helps reestablish the storm. And without that, it's going to fall apart. Yeah, it seems like we keep circling back to Ian over and over, but we're gonna try to work our way west and break free of the big elephant in the room, but we will circle back to that for the forecast. Further out to the west, we've got this northerly flow across the coastal regions. That's been in place for quite a while, so we're going to see a combination of Ekman forcing, also the long swell periods running about 12 seconds, 10 to 12 seconds. That's going to make for some hazardous conditions along the beaches, rip currents, inundation of coastal roads, especially down there in Texas. And we'll have to kind of keep an eye on that if you're down there along the beach. Lots of dry air has made it into Texas, and we can see a little southwesterly downslope flow starting to get set up. 95 degrees at Wichita Falls at this hour, and there's a little combination of thermal low and a baroclinic system over Oklahoma. Pretty weak, temperatures north of that in the 80s, and that connects back into this big trough in the northern plains. And then working out further west, a late season monsoon. This is pretty late for that monsoon moisture. However, yeah, storms in Colorado and Utah. Probably see those for a while. We're not looking for that precipitable water to start a decline into maybe next week. Also, a new Pacific frontal system coming on the northwest coast. A occlusion across Vancouver Island, temperatures down in the 50s and 60s. So heading into fall, and then we go up north, and Alaska, Yukon, Northwest Territories continuing to move into a winter pattern. There's a new active cold front. You can see south of that front, temperatures very pleasant in the 70s all the way to Churchill, but just north of that, there's the cold northerly flow. Some snow coming down around Cambridge Bay, out there towards Coppermine, and the Hudson Bay region, Baffin Island, continuing to be rather chilly. And then dropping back to the northeastern U.S., cold air advection, and that cold air advection producing showers. You've got the a rather cold air mass in the mid and upper levels across this area. Down near the surface, the air mass is transferring over relatively warm land, and that warms it up from the bottom. And cold over warm is a static instability situation. So that's going to destabilize the atmosphere, and we'll get those convective clouds start developing. And if you have just enough moisture, which we do, dew points up there in the 40s, pretty close to the actual temperature, that's going to mean shower activity. So lots of stratocumulus and shallow convective showers across the northeastern U.S. Temperature extremes. Yeah, I think we need a little song for that. It's always a very interesting part of the weathercast when we have unusual weather happening. So let's see what we have this week. For this afternoon, highs will be close to 90 in Montana and Idaho, 89 at Great Falls, tying the record. For tomorrow, the heat shifts towards Williston and Minot, coming up to 90 degrees in that area. For Friday, no records. Saturday. Sunday. Oh yeah, looks like Seattle heating up a little bit. 77 degrees. No records for Monday. And a little heat creeps back in for Tuesday with 77 at Olympia, but for the rest of the country, near seasonal temperatures. There's a look at the 250 millibar chart showing the upper level conditions across the North American continent. A couple of features that we're dealing with is the closed low right there and this trough. And this trough is being partially modulated by that hurricane. Normally these hurricanes don't have a huge impact on the upper level pattern, but this has been pulling down so much cold air that it's been sort of distorting things. And the dynamics in the hurricane are not really modeled well from a baroclinic sense, so it does add some ambiguity to the weather pattern and some unpredictability. So beyond 4 to 5 days, this is not really going to be very accurate as far as the GFS and ECMWF forecasts. The jet pattern for the time being is up through northern Canada into the Great Lakes, and that's the main frontal zone. You saw that front we talked about, and out in southern Nunavut near Churchill. So it's kind of right there ahead of this jet max. And then we got a couple of other cells or systems lined up out there in the Bering Sea area. And that brings us to another interesting weather system. And that's going to be the remains of a typhoon located right here, just east of Japan. And watch that move up into the Bering Sea area. You can see the pressure dropping rapidly down to 936 millibars around Shemya. So Shemya, which has the identifier PASY, you're going to want to watch that during the day tomorrow into tomorrow night. Often that site does go offline when things get really bad. And eventually that system will fill in, but it will be pretty stormy across the Aleutians. And I think the record low pressure is somewhere around 920. So this is not a record breaker, but this is definitely one for the history books. And of course that will weaken and not much of it left by early next week. And you can see the effect on the water vapor. We've got this one plume going into British Columbia, and some pretty healthy IVT values by the weekend. So heavy rains in southeastern Alaska and British Columbia. And then, of course, the other storm out there in the Bering Sea, the moisture doesn't really go anywhere, kind of rains itself out. And then we've got this other system out there near the garbage patch. I don't know if you've read about that, but it's located in this area. And that cutoff low just sits there and spins. And that's going to kind of block things for the West Coast, and it will prevent any significant precip from moving inland. But, you know, we're getting 153 hours out. I already mentioned that there is some unpredictability to the weather, so we'll just wait and see what happens early next week. But for the short term, it does look dry for the West Coast. All right, let's start talking about the forecast here. Precipitable water. That's a good place to start for this time of year. And during these transitional seasons, I like looking at anomaly rather than absolute values. The absolute values are important, but anomaly, that kind of gives you an idea of what you're dealing with. In this case, we've got a departure from normal. This is not percent of normal. So this is just how much wetter it is or how much drier it is in terms of inches. So a lot of dry air coming into the Gulf and very moist air making its way into the circulation of Ian. And out in the Rockies, you can see precipitation is above normal, about half to 3/4 above normal. And in terms of percentage, that's going to be about 150 to 200% in that area. All right, so those are some things to look at. And this is a good tracer for air masses because the dry air, that's going to be there due to advection and maybe subsidence, maybe some air sinking from the upper levels. All right, let's get this back on track. There goes Ian out there into the Atlantic. So by early Friday, it's heading up towards the Carolinas. And look at that plume of very rich moisture coming into North Carolina and South Carolina. So that's going to be about an inch wetter than what we typically see with that type of air mass this time of year. And dry air working in the backside. So things will be improving, and they can get on with the disaster recovery efforts in Florida, certainly by Friday or late on Friday. Anyway, the circulation heads up into the Appalachians, lots of precipitable water spreading through here. So that'll bring up some of the precip totals, but there is going to be dry air down near the surface. And out in the Rockies, that moisture will start working with this other cyclone developing in the northern plains. You can see that coming together there in western South Dakota, eastern Montana. And right there you can see a little low pressure area. I'm not sure exactly where the fronts are, but maybe something like that. Meanwhile, off in the eastern U.S., looks like a little cold core pool around Sunday or Monday, spinning around in the southern Appalachians, and then the main baroclinic zone heading out to sea. And let's see, after that, going into early next week, this is getting into uncertain territory. So I'm not going to worry about that too much, but let's look at the sea level pressure and precipitation for another look. You can see that pool of cold air up there in the northeastern U.S., the 540 decameter contour all the way down towards Montreal. And there goes Ian, heading up into the Carolinas for Friday and Saturday, interacting with that cool, dry air. And eventually the remains move out into the Atlantic. And we're left with a little precip area near that cold core low. Another little wild card down there in the Gulf of California for Monday or Tuesday that could funnel some moisture up into northern Mexico and into West Texas. We'll have to watch that early next week. And other than that, I really don't think there's much to talk about. However, the GFS is trying to build a pretty good pool of cold air. Doesn't look like it's in much hurry to come south, however. There's a look at the radar from Tampa. We are seeing a decrease in the precipitation area on the east side of the storm. Pretty well cleared out. And that's good news in terms of severe weather since the air there is pretty heavily sheared. And then further to the west, we've got some heavy precip coming down. Let's take a quick look at the echo tops. Those are running about 30 to 35,000. Can't find my scale. Oh, there it is. Yeah, that's going to be 35,000. And the eye of the storm, that's about 25 miles inland already. I do wonder if this is moving a little bit faster than forecast. Anyway, it will be across central Florida this evening, and that rain will continue to come down. And I almost forgot to take a look at the surface data. Unfortunately, we are missing stations. Probably a combination of equipment outages and communications issues. Probably the internet is having problems through that region. Anyway, we don't know. However, there's the wind field. Lots of gusts above 50 knots, but it appears it is diminishing. Let's see, this station right here, I'm not really familiar with the towns inland, but gusting to 51, Sarasota gusting to 68. Looks like a lot of these have come down. However, I'm sure the winds are still raging in this area just north and close to Fort Myers. And the infrared satellite imagery, that's the best indication of trends on the storm. You can see it starts out with a lot of black and dark red, and those gradually go away. The storm is definitely weakening. You can see it. There's a few last gasps right there north of Fort Myers, but the land is taking its toll at this time, and the storm, of course, is losing the infusion of warm sea surface temperatures. However, as we said, major rain impacts tonight, and be prepared for flash flooding if you're anywhere in central Florida this evening. Going to leave you with some more footage from Greg showing San Antonio just yesterday. So enjoy that, and we will see you back here on Friday. Take care. Bye-bye.